Hey parents, happy Teenager Tuesday.
Woo!
Will and Elijah here again. That was a good woo. I like that. As always, the whole point of this podcast is to be a resource for the families and parents at our church. But if this is helpful for other people, feel free, please share that around. I actually got months ago now, but I got an email from someone who doesn't go to our church who got the podcast shared with them, and we're just like, thank you so much for putting this stuff out. So
Yeah,
it was
that's
awesome.
awesome.
Yeah. Elijah and I are going to start talking about just some topics really that we got from the parent survey. Thank you for filling that out. If you're one of those, we love that. We're very thankful for that. And we want to help in ways that you are saying, help me. And in one of those ways, there was a few parents that wrote in and said they were struggling with just having their student be honest with them.
Yeah.
So we have 7 kind of tips and perspectives that we think can help with those conversations. Well, really, better said, can really help you set up honesty between you and your student.
Yeah.
Because long term, when they're an adult, they're going to be craving somewhere to be vulnerable and honest. And we think these tips are going to help set up that future between you and them for the long haul. The first one of those being, as parents, we have to be honest with how much we know them now.
Yeah.
There's a temptation of parents, you've lived with them for 15 years, you changed them, you were there like in middle school, you were there in elementary school, all the way down. And something that me and Elijah have seen, not from everybody, but sometimes can happen, is where parents can assume they know something about their student without just asking. So it's the idea of like, just don't assume. Just ask them. How much do we know and how much are we assuming?
Yeah, and that was one of the things. We had a parent podcast, maybe a year ago now, where we brought a student in and they talked about, maybe 2 years ago now, we brought a student in and that was one of the things they brought up. I feel like my parents assume too much about me. That actually isn't who I am.
Yeah.
And it's a great point. And I think it's something that should be thought about as a parent.
Yeah. And
cool.
The parent could ask them too, and they were like, oh, I was right. But then it was good. And then you're not assuming,
For sure.
So, yeah.
Number 2, model honesty. Model honesty. This is something I say about Jesus, but he never mandated something he didn't model. So if we want honesty from our students, we have to model that in our lives too.
Yeah.
It's an easy example, and so it's just like an authentic relationship between parents and students. Being honest, model that in your own lives. It's the same thing. If someone says something to you and they're not following it, it's really easy to shove that off. And so set that example. But even the honesty of being vulnerable. Hey, I said this wrong. I did this wrong. I shouldn't have done that. There's an honesty in that is very valuable. And if you want your students to also do that with you or with other people, you have to set the tone with that and say, this is how we model honesty in our home and how we live that out.
Yeah. And them even feeling some of the parent pressures that you feel.
Yeah.
If you're stressed about finances and you're like, I have to hide this from the kids. Honestly, not every situation. I'm kind of speaking in generalities here, obviously, but man, a lot of the time it'd be better if you just share that vulnerability with them, because then you're showing them, I'm struggling with something. And this is what I'm struggling with, and this is how we can struggle well together as a family. You're kind of creating that.
Yeah.
Number 2 was model honesty. Number 3 is talk when they want to talk. Talk when they want to talk. One of the tips that we give parents after camp especially is give them food, let them take a nap before you really ask them a million questions.
Yeah.
Because maybe they're super tired. But every year, I love it. Every year, parents tag me on Facebook with a picture of their student sleeping. And they're like, thanks for the tip. Gave them Chick-fil-A and they're sleeping, waiting for them to be well rested before we talk. But then other students get in the car and they're exhausted and they want to talk right then.
Yeah.
One thing my mom said to me years ago was, I was always ready to talk when you wanted to talk. However, your sister always wanted to talk at night and you always wanted to talk first thing in the morning. But it's just like, I'm tired, but that's the time when y'all want to talk. And I was like, I can't put this off because you won't want to talk later.
Yeah, and it goes into just knowing your student. Right?
Yes.
What we talked about earlier, like knowing how they talk, knowing what the best time is to have those moments with them is valuable. Speaking of talking, something that I think as parents we got to do better at. I can say we because I am also a parent. Let's go. But it's the idea of conversation versus interrogation. So many students feel like they're under suspicion in their conversations with their parents, in conversations with adults. It's always coming out of a place of suspicion rather than a place of trust.
Yeah.
And so here's some of the examples. Coming into a conversation, instead of saying, "Where were you? Who were you with? How'd the night go?" Like that feels very interrogating, almost like they're like a police officer's like, "Sir, can you stop right there? I need to ask you some questions." That's not really the point of view of a parent, like conversationally, that we should have. It's switching that and really gauging more of letting them kind of bring some of those things to light in natural conversation rather than forcing the point of those things.
Yeah.
Because people are probably less likely to talk if they're feeling like people are suspicious.
That's true. And it's not to say don't ask questions.
Yes.
But you might, we have to realize, even if we think our tone is great, asking a conversation, how does this question feel to the student at this time?
Yeah.
Like, again, it goes back to knowing your teenager, your middle schooler, your high schooler. If they think it's an interrogation over just curiosity or you just wanting to connect, they may not be like, they may not feel that. And then there's a miscommunication of expectations, you know? So even with that, you can say like, "Hey, I'd love to know how your life is. I want to update. Like, I care about you. I feel like that maybe there's some things that you love that I don't know you love right now. Like, can you tell, versus like, hey, tell me all of your friends,
Who is there?
Where are you?
Yeah. And I think part of that is like, we kind of going back to model that in yourself.
Yeah.
You share information, you share your life with them. If it's just, them sharing their stories, it does feel more like, hey, this is very one-sided.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that we've said on this podcast off and on that some people agree, others disagree, and then there's obviously limits to this also. A tip that we give to parents is if a teenager confesses to something, don't mandate your own consequences. If they confess, if you catch them doing something, that's different, I think.
Right.
But if a teenager comes to you with vulnerability saying, "I did this and I'm sorry and I want to change," I think in my opinion, I think it is irresponsible for us to then hammer consequences, not saying actions shouldn't be taken, but I think from there you can work towards agreed accountability versus like mandating consequences because it was probably over a year ago now. I was talking with a parent about their teenager looking at pornography, and they were like, "What if they come and have this conversation with me?" I said, again, I think open honesty and them seeing you as a safe place to confess and work on how they can change together is better than you stopping them from getting to pornography in one way. Yeah. Like that, what's better, to help them in the battle or to just close up one loop? Because if someone has a smartphone, an iPad, there's always a way to get to it. And the value of the conversation is always way better that conversation is coming to you versus them learning, "Oh, I need to hide this because if I say anything, then I just get in trouble." Yeah. The hiding part's big. And it's like the idea of slap on the wrist, right? Slap on the wrist sometimes is effective, but not really. But it's the idea of knowing why it's bad. And same thing goes in religion in general, like understanding that rules are not in place to punish us, they're in place to help us. And unless they have the understanding, the slap on the wrist actually won't mean that much. Yeah. And there's limits. Yeah, for sure. But I think those limits are more extreme, but yeah. All right, two more. Number 6, if you got notes, if you're in your car taking notes, great, pull over maybe. But be careful not to assign identity to an attribute. Identity is a big thing with students right now. It has always been really, they're figuring out who they are. Yeah. And what I'm saying when I say this is, when you say, try not to go, "Hey, you're this, you're a brat, you are bad, you're a bad kid, you're just bad." Like, because when someone hears that, all of a sudden their identity goes from, "Oh, I did a bad thing," or "I did something that wasn't right," to "I'm not right, I'm bad, I actually inherently am this way." And biblically, spiritually, we don't believe that, right? We believe that we make mistakes, but our soul is right when it's in connection with God. And so try not to put identifiers on students. And that can be challenging, but it's really just verbiage. It's understanding that we are making them you are not the flaw.
your identity is found somewhere else.
Yeah, and I would even say even on the positive side.
Yeah.
If we say you're a happy person, and that's like the main thing that we say about them, well, what if they're not happy at a certain point? What if they go through depression? Then all of a sudden they're losing an aspect of their identity.
That's so
there was a counselor that said, not to me, but to someone else, that they said, you are not feelings, you have feelings. And I think that does shield our soul from being identified as an attribute versus you're a son and a daughter of God. You know, it's a small tweak, but over time, I think it can do some of that erosion to us.
For sure.
In not great ways.
Yep.
And then number 7, be careful not to cut them down in public. Even in joking ways, even at like, there are people over. I would even say be careful about doing that when it's to a degree, when they're not around, you know?
Right.
Teenagers say like, I've seen memes and stuff about teenagers saying like, my parents will like, they'll joke about something I was vulnerable about to gain clout. If you don't know what clout is, it's like respect, I guess, building themselves up. Be very cautious to not cut them down, even in a joking way, because again, you mean it innocently, but how are they receiving it?
So
I heard a parent even say, I don't want to be that parent whose teenager needs a lot of sleep because they're growing, and then they come and like, well, look who liked to show up, you know, versus saying like, oh, you're here, yay, you're finally awake, we get to spend time together. You know, like just build them up with those words, and just be careful not to cut down in public is what I would say.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Well, those are the 7. Those are the big 7. If you do those things, you'll be a perfect parent. No, but the honesty is a big part of it, and I'm happy we got to speak into that. I know it's hard, though. I know it's difficult, but it's just some tips and tricks that will help you hopefully have better, honest conversations with your students, which will overall make them a better person.
It will, because you're the best influence in their life.
You are.
All right, parents, remember, you can do this. You're not alone. God is with you, and so are we. We'll see you next week.
See ya.